My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pressed the phone against my ear and listened to it ring. Not from fear. From the cold, deliberate calm that comes right after everything breaks. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in December. And I was sitting on the bathroom floor of the house I grew up in. My back pressed against the locked door. A wet dish towel wrapped around my right forearm where my sister had raked a broken wine glass across my skin 20 minutes earlier. The cut wasn't deep enough to need stitches. I had already checked, but it was deep enough to bleed through the first towel, and that felt like enough of a verdict. Through the door, I could hear my stepmother moving around the kitchen, humming something cheerful. The sound of cabinet doors opening and closing like nothing had happened at all. Like my sister wasn't sitting on the living room couch with a fresh glass of wine, flipping through channels. Like I hadn't just been told, with a smile, that I was lucky anyone in this family still tolerated me. My name is Claire Alderman. I'm a pediatric nurse at St. Michael's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I have spent the last 6 years learning how to stay calm in rooms where children are dying. I know how to keep my voice level when a mother is screaming. I know how to hold someone's hand through the worst moment of their life and not flinch. But sitting on that cold bathroom tile, listening to my stepmother hum, I could not hold myself together for even 30 more seconds. So I called the one person I knew would answer. She picked up on the second ring. Her name was Donna Parrish. And she was the charge nurse who had trained me when I first started at St. Michael's. She was 61 years old and had survived 2 marriages, a hurricane in South Carolina, and 34 years of emergency pediatrics. She did not rattle. "Talk to me," she said. No greeting. No preamble. Because that was Donna, and I did. Quietly, with my back against that door, I told her everything. Not just the wine glass. Everything. I need you to understand something first. Because what happened that December is only the end of a very long story, and the end doesn't make sense without the beginning. My mother died when I was 9. A brain aneurysm, fast and without warning. On a Wednesday afternoon in March, while I was at school learning about the water cycle, my father, Robert Alderman, remarried 3 years later. Her name was Patricia, and she had a daughter 2 years older than me named Vanessa. Patricia was not cruel in the ways that are easy to identify. She never screamed at me. She never called me ugly names. She was always perfectly composed, always smiling, always the picture of gracious stepmother. The cruelty was quieter than that. It lived in the way she would praise Vanessa's drawing and then say to me, looking at mine, "Well, isn't that interesting?" It lived in the way she would call my father into another room right when I started talking. It lived in the seating arrangements at holiday dinners, where Vanessa sat beside my father and I sat at the corner of the table with a slightly shorter chair that was genuinely from a different set. I was 12 when I first understood that I was not imagining it. I had won a science fair at my middle school. First place out of 200 students, for a project on cardiac rhythms I had built with materials I bought with my own babysitting money because Patricia had said she didn't see the point in funding school hobbies. My teacher, Mrs. Okafor, had called the house to personally congratulate my father. That night at dinner, Patricia mentioned it. "Claire had some little science thing today," she said, pouring herself more wine. "She got a ribbon." She smiled at me. "That's sweet, honey." My father nodded, distracted, and passed the bread basket. Vanessa got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a handshake and a card that Patricia had clearly signed for both of them. By the time I was in high school, I had learned to keep my victories small and quiet, to hold them close to my chest like something fragile that the wrong person could crush. I got into Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship. I told my father privately, away from Patricia. He looked proud for exactly 4 seconds before Patricia walked into the room, and he folded the acceptance letter and put it in his pocket and said, We'll talk about it later. We never did. I paid for most of college myself. Between scholarships and nursing school loans and 3 part-time jobs, my father contributed some, grudgingly, in amounts I always suspected Patricia had already negotiated down before the money ever left the account. Vanessa went to a private university, her mother fully funded. When Vanessa graduated and moved back home for a year to figure things out, she was given the large guest suite with the ensuite bathroom. When I graduated and briefly needed to stay home between leases, I was given the small bedroom over the garage. That was the shape of my childhood. Not a house on fire. A house with the heat turned down just slightly too low in my particular corner of it. I left as soon as I could and stayed away for as long as I could. 6 years of building a life in Columbus, a city I loved. An apartment I filled with plants and thrift store furniture, and the slow, steady accumulation of a person who had decided to be happy. I became good at my job. I made real friends. I stopped flinching at dinner tables. And then my father had a heart attack at 62. And everything collapsed back into itself. He survived. He came home from the hospital with a stent and a list of dietary restrictions, and the slightly stunned look of a man who had just been reminded that time was not infinite. I drove home the weekend after his discharge because he was my father. Because no matter what, he was my father. And I sat with him in the living room while Patricia hovered in the kitchen doorway, and Vanessa sat on the armchair filing her nails. He looked older than I expected. Smela. Something in his face that had always been slightly closed seemed cracked open. And he reached for my hand when I sat down beside him and held it. And didn't let go for almost an hour. That was the trap. That small, quiet warmth. That was the thing that made me start driving home more often. Made me say yes when Patricia called and asked if I could come for Christmas. Then Easter. Then just a family weekend. That was the thing that made me believe, foolishly and desperately, that maybe the geometry of this family could be different now, that a man who had looked at his own mortality might finally have room for his daughter. I should have known better. I had 22 years of evidence, the weekend of the wine glass. I had driven home because my father's 6-month cardiac checkup had gone well, and Patricia had called it a celebration. What I walked into was a pre-existing argument between Vanessa and Patricia about money, specifically about the fact that Vanessa, at 34, was still being fully subsidized by Patricia. And Patricia was beginning to make loud noises about how maybe it was time for Vanessa to contribute something to the household. I want to be precise about what happened because precision matters. I was in the kitchen helping with dinner when Vanessa came in and poured herself a glass of wine from the open bottle on the counter. She was already not sober. I could tell by the way she moved. Slightly too deliberate. And by the way she was smiling, which was the smile that meant she had already decided the evening was going to be bad and had made her peace with it. "Claire," she said, setting the wine glass down on the counter. Not looking at me. "I heard you're up for charge, nurse." I applied. I said, "I don't know if I'll get it." "You probably won't," she said pleasantly. "You always choke when things actually matter." I didn't answer. I had learned, over years, not to answer. "You know what your problem is," she continued, still in that pleasant voice. "You think working hard means you deserve things. Like the universe owes you something because you tried real hard." She picked up the wine glass and gestured vaguely in my direction. "Nobody cares how hard you tried. Claire, either you're the kind of person things work out for, or you're not." I turned back to the cutting board. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. That was when she grabbed my arm and turned me around. And the wine glass she was still holding swung with her. And the rim caught the inside of my forearm in a way that I don't think she fully intended, but that she also didn't remotely regret. The cut opened. Vanessa looked at it. And then at me. And then said, calm as anything, "You should be more careful." My stepmother appeared in the kitchen doorway at that exact moment. She looked at my arm. She looked at Vanessa. She said, "Let's all just take a breath," and reached past me to get the paper towels. That was it. That was the entire response. I wrapped my arm, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, sat down on the floor, and called Donna. I told her everything. The wine glass, the years before the wine glass, the way Patricia had said, "Let's all take a breath," like she was mediating a minor disagreement about a TV show, the way my father was 20 feet away in the living room and nobody had told him anything, and I knew without any doubt that nobody was going to. When I finished, Donna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Claire, listen to me carefully. How many times in the last year have you driven home?" I counted. 8 or 9 times. "And how many times in the last year has Vanessa been kind to you?" I didn't answer. "You're a nurse," Donna said. "You document everything at work, every symptom, every incident. Every time a patient says something, you need to remember. You write it down because you know that patterns are only visible when you have the whole picture in front of you." She paused. "Start writing it down," she said. "Date? Time. What happened? Who was there? What was said? Exactly. Word for word when you can remember it. And Claire," her voice shifted into something lower and more serious, "take a photo of your arm. Right now. Before the light changes. That's evidence." I took the photo. I went back to Columbus 2 days earlier than I had planned. I told my father I had a shift change, which was a lie. And I watched his face do the thing it had been doing my whole life, the slight flicker of something that might have been regret, immediately smoothed over by relief, that there would be no conflict to navigate. I drove the 2 hours home with both hands on the wheel, and the photo saved in a folder on my phone that I labeled, with absolutely no drama, "Records." What Donna had given me wasn't just a strategy. It was a reframe. I was not a daughter who kept getting hurt at family gatherings. I was a professional who had been documenting a long-term pattern of escalating behavior. I was not helpless. I was building a case. Over the next 4 months, I filled 3 notebooks. I wrote down the Christmas Eve phone call where Patricia told me, warmly, that she thought it might be less complicated if I spent Christmas with friends this year, since Vanessa was bringing someone home and space was a consideration. I wrote down the date, the time, her exact phrasing. I wrote down the text from Vanessa 2 weeks later, informing me that she had told our father I had chosen not to come for Christmas because I was too busy with work friends, and that he had seemed to accept this. I wrote down the February weekend where I drove home because my father asked me to, where I arrived to find that the small bedroom over the garage where I always stayed had been converted, without any notice, into a crafting room for Patricia, and that I was expected to sleep on the pull-out couch in the den. When I mentioned this to my father, he said, "She mentioned it to me. I thought she told you." He had not verified that she had actually told me. He never verified anything. I wrote down the Sunday afternoon phone call where Vanessa told me, in a tone of sisterly concern, that she thought I should know that my father was worried about my emotional instability and had been talking to Patricia about it, that he thought maybe my nursing career was putting me under too much stress, that they were concerned I might need some kind of intervention. When I called my father directly and asked if this was true, he said, "Well, Vanessa means well. She just worries about you." He did not say it was untrue. I wrote it all down. Every calculated little thing. I watched the pattern emerge with the cold clarity of a diagnosis. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It never is. My father called me in April and told me he wanted to update his will. He was meeting with an estate attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, and he wanted all of us present. He was 71% serious and 29%, I think, hoping that the formality of the occasion might create some kind of détente between his daughters. He was wrong about the 29%. I sat across the table from Patricia and Vanessa in Gerald Fitch's office on a gray Thursday morning, and listened to my father describe the estate plan that Patricia had clearly drafted herself and handed to Fitch pre-assembled, the house where I grew up, where my mother had chosen every piece of furniture and planted the garden along the back fence, was to pass entirely to Patricia upon my father's death. With the understanding that upon Patricia's death it would pass to Vanessa, there was a monetary bequest for me. It was not small, but it was also exactly the kind of arrangement that communicates, with elegant legal precision, you are an afterthought in this family. And now it's in writing. My father was watching me when Fitch read that section. Something moved across his face. A small, involuntary thing that looked almost like apology. Patricia was looking at her hands. Vanessa was looking out the window. I said nothing. I took the copy of the draft they gave me, folded it into my bag, thanked Gerald Fitch for his time, and walked to my car. I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes. Then I called a woman named Sandra Obi. I had found Sandra 6 weeks earlier. On the recommendation of a social worker at St. Plank, Michaels, who knew that I had started asking questions about family law. Sandra was a partner at a Columbus firm that specialized in elder law and estate litigation. She was 44, Nigerian American, wore eyeglasses with bright red frames, and had a way of listening with her entire body that made you feel like every word you said was being filed away for later use. I had already sent her my notebooks. They used the draft you sent me, Sandra said. When I told her what Fitch had presented, yes. Good, she said. That means the document is exactly what I expected it to be. She explained what she had found. My mother, who had died when I was 9, had owned the house jointly with my father. At the time of her death, her half had passed to my father through right of survivorship. But my mother's original will, written before her marriage, had included a clause that certain specific assets, including the property that later became the house, were held in partial trust for her biological children. The clause had been improperly executed, and my father's estate attorney at the time had simply not flagged it. It had been sitting in a probate file in Franklin County for 22 years. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Sandra said, with the particular calm of someone who has been waiting to say this for a while, that Patricia does not have the clean title she thinks she has, and that any estate plan built on the assumption that she does may have a very significant problem. I stared at the gray parking lot outside my windshield. It also means, Sandra continued, that the conduct you've documented, the financial positioning, the isolation from your father, the manufactured narrative about your emotional instability is going to look very different to a judge in the context of an estate that may have been improperly organized. I asked her what we did next. She told me. I drove home to Columbus. I went to work the next morning and took care of 4 children between the ages of 2 and 9. And I was steady and focused and good at my job, and nobody in that hospital could have guessed that I was also quietly dismantling 20 years of a carefully constructed lie. The trap was Sandra's idea. And it was simple in the way that truly effective things usually are. I called my father and told him that I had been thinking about the estate meeting and that I wanted to come home and talk to him privately. Just the 2 of us. I told him I wasn't angry, which was only partly true, and that I wanted to understand his thinking, which was entirely true. Patricia, of course, ensured she was home when I arrived. I had expected this. Sandra had expected this. Everything that happened in the next 3 hours was, in one way or another, expected. I sat at the kitchen table with my father and said, calmly and without accusation, that I had questions about my mother's estate, that I had been doing some research and had found some documents in Franklin County that I thought he should be aware of. Patricia was in the kitchen behind us. Not pretending not to listen, my father's face did something complicated. Where did you find those? He asked. Probate office, I said. They're public record. Patricia set her coffee cup down on the counter. Claire, she said. In here warmest? most reasonable voice. I don't think this is the time to be stirring up old paperwork. Your father has been through a difficult year. And I think what this family needs right now is to move forward, not to dig into things that were resolved a long time ago. They weren't resolved. I said, they were just never looked at. The warmth dropped out of Patricia's face by about 3 degrees. Just 3. She was very good. I think, she said carefully, that you're going through something. I think the stress of your job, and maybe some feelings that have never really been addressed about your mother, are making you want to find problems where there aren't any. There it was. The emotional instability narrative. Deployed in real time. I appreciate that. I said. I kept my voice level, but I've had an estate attorney look at the documents. And she agrees that there are some questions that need to be answered. I think it would be helpful if everyone could meet with her. Patricia looked at my father. Something passed between them. I don't think we need an outside attorney involved in a family matter. Patricia said. That may be. I said. But the documents exist either way. The meeting happened 2 weeks later in Sandra's conference room in Columbus. Patricia and Vanessa arrived together. 15 minutes late. In a coordinated display of relaxed confidence. My father arrived separately, 3 minutes after them, and sat in the chair nearest the door. Sandra was at the head of the table in her red-framed glasses, with a paralegal beside her and a neat stack of folders that she didn't open for the first 8 minutes of the meeting, which I came to understand was intentional. She explained the situation with the original trust clause in language that was precise and thorough, and that left Patricia with progressively fewer places to redirect the conversation. She walked through the timeline of the estate. She explained what improperly executed meant in practical terms, and then she said, with the same professional warmth she had used for the previous 20 minutes, I also want to address something I've become aware of during this process that is relevant to the estate context. She opened the first folder. Inside were dates, times, specific phrases. My notebooks. Rendered into a 12-page document titled, With Legal Neutrality, Pattern of Conduct Relevant to Undue Influence in Estate Planning Matters. Patricia's face. When she understood what she was looking at, I did something I'd waited my entire life to see. It didn't collapse. Patricia was too controlled for collapse. But it went very still. A held-breath stillness. Like the moment before a diagnosis. This is absurd, Vanessa said. Her voice was sharp. Sandra looked at her with patient attention. You're welcome to review the documentation. This is a list of things Claire decided to interpret as slights. Vanessa said. This is a woman who has spent her whole life feeling sorry for herself, and now she wants to turn that into a legal case. My father said nothing. He was looking at the table. The Christmas call. I said quietly. I wasn't looking at Vanessa. I was looking at my father. You thought I chose not to come. I didn't choose. I was told it was less complicated if I wasn't there. And Patricia told you I had chosen. My father looked up. The emotional instability conversations. I said. Vanessa called me in February to tell me you were worried about me. That you'd been talking to Patricia about whether I needed an intervention. When I asked you about it, you didn't say it wasn't true. He blinked. I don't, Dad. I said. Not angry. Just clear. I need you to hear this. The room was very quiet. Sandra let the quiet sit for a moment, as she had let the folder sit closed for 8 minutes. And then she spoke in her measured, unhurried way about the legal options on the table. There were several. None of them were quick. But at least 2 of them were, in Sandra's assessment, quite strong. The simplest, she explained, was a straightforward correction of the estate document to accurately reflect the trust clause in my mother's original will. This would mean that the house would pass to me upon my father's death. As my mother had intended, it would not leave Patricia without provision. Sandra had drafted an alternative arrangement that was equitable and defensible. The other option, she said, was litigation, which would be lengthy, public, and likely to result in a thorough examination of the estate's history in front of a judge. She slid a single document across the table. It was 2 pages. "This is the corrected arrangement," she said. "I'd encourage you to take it home and have your own attorney review it." Patricia looked at it for a long moment. She looked at Vanessa. She looked at my father, who was still looking at the table. "Fine," Patricia said. The word was a stone dropped into still water. Fine. It was not a victory I celebrated that night. I drove home alone through Columbus in the dark and sat in my apartment for an hour before I could make myself eat anything. My hands were steady. That was the thing I noticed. My hands, which had shaken on that bathroom floor in December, were perfectly still. I called Donna. "It's done," I said. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly, like I'd been running for a very long time. I said. And I just stopped. Donna made a soft sound that was not pity and was not celebration. It was something better than both. Recognition. "Go eat something," she said. "And sleep. Everything else can wait until tomorrow." I ate. I slept. The months that followed were not simple. My father called me 3 times in the week after the meeting. The first 2 calls were brief and stilted, full of the careful phrasing of a man trying to navigate between his wife and his daughter, and refusing to fully pick a side. I was honest with him in a way I had never allowed myself to be before, because I no longer had anything to protect by softening the truth. I told him what the years had felt like. I told him about the chair at the corner of the table. I told him about the science fair ribbon. I told him that I had stopped expecting anything from him a long time ago, and that the grief of that was something I carried, and that I didn't say it to punish him, only because he deserved to know. The third call was different. He cried. Quietly. In the way of a man who has not cried in a long time and doesn't quite know what to do with the feeling. He said things that were insufficient and also true. He said he had told himself a version of the story in which Patricia was difficult but not harmful, in which he was keeping the peace rather than choosing a side, in which I was strong enough not to need his protection. I told him that I had needed it, that the point was not whether I was strong enough to survive without it. The point was that I had been a child, and he had been my father. And strength was never supposed to be the requirement. He didn't try to argue. That was something. I told him I wasn't ready to come home for holidays yet, but that I was willing to have lunch with him. Just him. Once a month. In Columbus. On neutral ground. He agreed without hesitation. We have had 7 of those lunches now. They are imperfect, and often slightly awkward, and sometimes very sad. They are also real. And I think that is more than I had before. I did not pursue a relationship with Patricia or Vanessa. There are people in your life who are capable of growth, and there are people who are not. And one of the clearest lessons I took from 6 years of pediatric nursing is that you cannot force a wound to heal faster than its biology allows. You can only create the right conditions and wait. Patricia and Vanessa are not creating the right conditions. That is not my problem to solve anymore. The charge nurse position, the one Vanessa had said I would choke on, I got it. I was notified in March, on a Tuesday morning, by my nursing director, who shook my hand in the hallway and said my name and the word congratulations in a sentence together. And I stood there for a moment longer than was probably professional, just holding the feeling. I called Donna from the parking garage. She had already heard through the hospital grapevine, which at St. Michael's functions at approximately the speed of light. She was already laughing when she answered. That afternoon, I went back to my mother's house, my house. Legally now, though my father is still living. And I don't think of it that way yet in my heart, and I stood in the back garden where my mother had planted everything. And I looked at the fence line. And I thought about a woman I barely remembered who had tried, before she died, to make sure I was taken care of. She had tried. The paperwork had just gotten buried. The way things do, under the weight of time and other people's intentions. I'm telling you this because I know some of you are sitting somewhere right now in the quiet that follows being hurt by someone who was supposed to love you. Maybe you're in a bathroom with the door locked. Maybe you're in a parking lot with your hands on the steering wheel. Maybe you're lying in the dark trying to figure out how something that looked like a family could feel this lonely. I want you to know that what you're feeling is not dramatic. It is not instability. It is not you being too sensitive or too difficult or too much. It is the accurate response to an inaccurate situation. Write it down. Find the Donna in your life. Find the Sandra. Build your case. Not with anger, but with clarity, because clarity is the most powerful thing you have. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. And you don't have to keep pretending otherwise. If this reached you, if any piece of this felt familiar, I want you to leave one word in the comments. Just witnessed. That's it. Because that's what this community is. We witness each other. We don't let each other fight in silence. And whatever you're carrying right now, I want you to know that it's being held, at least in part, by every single person watching this. You are not alone. Subscribe if you want to stay. And I'll be here.